Hi, everybody. Hello, teachers. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from in the world. Welcome, everyone, to this first webinar of 2026. I'm so glad you're here to join us. My name is Janine Matz. I'm an English language specialist for RELO Andes. Welcome, everyone, to this webinar. Please go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat. Hello, those of you who are joining us. Hello, Piero. Hello, Monica from La Paz, Bolivia. Nice to see you here today. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. I hope you have all started this new year with a lot of positive energy and good vibes. And today's topic that we're going to talk about is, as you can see, the teacher behind the method, creating your EFL teaching philosophy. So I think this is a great topic to start off the new year with some new goals and some new resolutions. Welcome to those of you who are still joining us. Hello, Alfredo. Nice to see you also. Hi, Jenny from La Paz, Bolivia. Hello. Hi, Eliberto in Venezuela. Thank you for joining us. Hi, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so let's get started. So my first question that I have for you is, have you heard of a teaching philosophy? And what do you think it is? If you're not quite sure, you can guess. What do you think a teaching philosophy is? We can analyze it by parts, right? We can say there's teaching and there's philosophy. What is a philosophy about something? Yeah, so let us know, share your thoughts about what a teaching philosophy is. Hello, everybody. I'm excited to see you. Hi, Matilde in Lima. Nice to see you. Hello, Jorge in Huaraz, Peru. Vilma also, hello. Rosemary, hello. So share some ideas with us. What do you think? Answer in the chat, please. What do you think a teaching philosophy entails? What does it include? Maybe some of you have already written a teaching philosophy. Maybe for some of you, this is the first time you're hearing the term. So share with us. Let's see what you say. Monica says, the way we teach our values, our beliefs, our principles. Great. That's a great definition of a teaching philosophy. What else makes a teaching philosophy? What other ideas do we have? Yes, it is your guide to live. Okay, Matilde, yes. Raul, welcome from Paraguay. Nice to see you. Okay, Alfredo says passion to teach and see the progress of our students. Okay, that could also form part of our teaching philosophy. Great. What other ideas do we have about what a teaching philosophy is? Go ahead and share them with us in the chat, please. This is an interactive webinar, so we would like to see your comments and your ideas on the topics. Okay. So if we want to define what a teaching philosophy is, we can say what it is and also what it is not. Right? So what is a teaching philosophy? We can say a teaching philosophy is basically a clear statement of your beliefs about teaching and learning, because teaching is a two-way street, right? It's teaching and learning that come together. It's also a guide for decision-making in the classroom. How do we make the decisions that we make in our classrooms? Based on what, right? It's also what we can consider a professional identity document. So it does have something to do with who we are in this case as teachers, right? I see some of you also commenting still here. Martita, nice to see you from Ecuador. How our way of teaching, our thought for working with our students. That's great. Alicia, welcome. She says, we built our teaching philosophy according to our experience. That's a very good point, Alicia. Yes, our teaching philosophy can change over the years. Eliberto says, my philosophy is to do my best all the time I'm teaching and make students communicate effectively. That's very important. Thank you. And how do we do that in our classes, right? We take that a step further. Okay. What is a teaching philosophy not? So it is not simply a list of methods like communicative language teaching, task-based language teaching. It's not definitions of different methods, for example. It is not a research paper filled with buzzwords. Do you all know this word? Buzzwords? Buzzwords, in case you're not familiar, is a term that we use to refer to a specific set of words that are like very popular or in vogue at the moment, right? Like, for example, gamification. That's a buzzword nowadays. But our teaching philosophy is not a research paper on those things, right? And it is also not a rigid set of rules you commit to following. That is not a teaching philosophy either. Right? Okay. Why do we need a teaching philosophy? There are a lot of reasons why we could need a teaching philosophy. So let's take a look at some teaching realities that we have in the region. So the region of RELO Andes comprises 7 countries that are located in South America, right? I personally live in Ecuador, in Quito, the capital of Ecuador. And I see these teaching realities in English classrooms all the time, where we have, for example, large classes, mixed proficiency levels. Our students are very heterogeneous, that they have all different levels. We also have limited time and resources, especially in the public school system, where we can't spend as many hours as we would like to with our students every week. And we also have pressure from exams, institutions, parents. We hear this all the time, right? My child needs to know English. They need to be fluent in English. They should already know how to speak, etc. And I'm sure a lot of you have had to deal with some of these scenarios before. So how does a teaching philosophy help us to work with these scenarios? Well, we have justifying your pedagogical choices. Sometimes when we make choices in our classrooms, they are put into question by authorities, by parents, by other colleagues, right? So a solid teaching philosophy helps us to really justify and stand behind our pedagogical choices. It also helps us to adapt methods to context. So I can tell myself as a teacher, yes, I want to teach communicatively, right? What is my context? Is that possible in this particular context? And it also helps us to say no to unrealistic expectations. And unrealistic expectations exist in a lot of contexts. For example, a national curriculum might say, yes, our students will reach B2 level by the end of high school. But perhaps this is an unrealistic expectation if our students only have 1 hour of English per week in school. Yeah. So our teaching philosophy helps us to solidify our perspectives on language teaching. Okay. All right. So now I would like to know if you guys could please respond also in the chat. Thank you for all of your participation. This is wonderful. I want to know if you have ever asked for, or you have been asked for, a teaching philosophy, and in what context. In other words, some of you are probably coordinators of programs or directors of programs, right? Have you ever asked a teacher or an applicant for a position for a teaching philosophy? Or have you ever been asked in an interview or something for your teaching philosophy? Please share this in the chat. I know this is something that is quite popular in the North American context. I know that we learned how to write teaching philosophies in our university studies. And this is something that I also teach my students at university. Many of my students in linguistics will become future English teachers in Ecuador. And I have them build their teaching philosophy. So let us know if you have ever been asked for a teaching philosophy. So many of you are saying never. Here we have Monica says, yes, when I applied for jobs in the US, particularly at Interlink and UNCG. Okay, interesting. So when you apply for jobs abroad, many of you are saying no. Nan says yes. I'm wondering in what context you were asked for your teaching philosophy. Here in Ecuador, for example, I know that is the case in some private schools, especially the more prestigious private schools. They will ask their teachers for their teaching philosophies. So this may be something that is going to become more important in the future. Yeah. Charo, nice to see you from Bolivia. Charo says at the university, also in a course in the US to implement new trends of teaching. Good, wonderful. It is important to know how or why to change our practices. Thank you so much for sharing that, Charo. I totally agree. Yeah, so those of you who have not been asked for this yet, it's quite possible that this is something that is coming. So if we can be prepared for it, that will be wonderful. Yes, okay. So when might we have to present our teaching philosophy? So these are just a couple of the contexts in which you may need to present a teaching philosophy. For example, a job application or interview. You may need to present your teaching philosophy, or during the interview, the interviewer may say to you, what is your teaching philosophy? And you will have to have a solid idea of what that is, even if it's not in written form. What else? For a promotion, for example, to director or coordinator of a program. For a scholarship, some of you have just mentioned that in the United States, when you've applied for programs, they've asked you for it. Yeah, so for scholarships, for programs, for admittance into a program of study in a master's or PhD program in education, it's quite possible that they ask you for a teaching philosophy. Perhaps to receive an award, you might be asked for a teaching philosophy, or some other professional contexts in which it might be necessary to present a teaching philosophy. So this is a part of your portfolio, your teaching portfolio, that is very valuable in different professional contexts. Okay. So now that we see what it's for, and now that we know what it is, we need to know how to construct our teaching philosophy. So how do we do that? We start with the big core question behind every philosophy in general, which is why? Our central guiding question to develop a teaching philosophy would be, what do I believe about how languages are learned, and what does that mean for my teaching? In other words, taking some type of scientific theory and converting that into my daily practice in the classroom. Okay? So some of the sub-questions that we can ask can be, for example, what is the teacher's role in an EFL classroom? What am I supposed to do? We're going to discuss this in the chat in a little bit. What is the learner's role in the EFL classroom? And what constitutes successful learning? How do I know that my students are actually learning the English language, right? A lot of you are commenting some things in the chat right now. This is great. Melissa says, I felt that during the time and experiences, I had to change my teaching philosophy. Absolutely. The teaching philosophy is not a document that is set in stone, as we say in English, right? It is not permanent. It's a live document. It's constantly changing. I'm sure you guys know from your experience as teachers that perhaps you have learned just as much in your years of experience as you did during your university studies about teaching. Experience changes our perspectives on things, right? So we have to be also willing to change our teaching philosophy as we gain new information and knowledge about the field. Yes, this is very important. Okay. So now I'd like to ask you these questions. As it says on the screen, please comment in the chat. We're having a great discussion. This is really stimulating. So keep it up, teachers. Thank you. Here's my question. What is the teacher's role in an EFL classroom, and what is the learner's role? How do you answer this question? Well, you can think about what you have studied in your university studies, and you can also think about your own years of experience. What works well? What doesn't work well? Yeah. So let me hear from you. Type in the chat, please. What is the teacher's and the student's role in an EFL classroom? So Rosa tells us a teacher is a facilitator that guides his students and fosters autonomous learning. Yes, this is very reflective of a constructivist approach and also a communicative approach to language teaching, right? Nowadays, we are not the totalitarian figures in our classrooms. We are not authoritarian figures. We are not bosses. We are not the be-all, end-all, like we say. We are facilitators in a language classroom now. Yes. Eliberto says students are at the center of the process. Exactly. Because if you reflect teachers and we ask ourselves this question, who is responsible for learning? In a classroom, who is responsible for learning? The students are responsible for learning, right? So we have to facilitate that process for them, but they are the ones who are responsible for their own learning. So we need to give them the responsibility of learning, right? Yes, these are very interesting ideas. Piero says, I think teachers should be facilitators and students should be the main guides. Exactly. Main characters and autonomous learners. Yes. Good. Okay, so a lot of you seem to agree on this idea of a teacher as a facilitator and a student-centered classroom. Okay. Here's another question. What counts as successful learning? If you reflect on your students and your progress together, because you're working with them, not against them, right? A lot of times students think that we're the enemy, but we're not the enemy. We're there to work with them. Okay, so if we reflect on this process, what counts as successful learning? How do I know when my students are successful in English? So then I think about it. Does successful learning mean memorizing all the past participles in alphabetical order of the irregular verbs? Is that successful learning? Maybe we need to broaden the idea and think about what does it mean to know a language? Yeah, which is why I have the next question on there. Okay, good. I like seeing all of your comments. Thank you so much for commenting, for sharing your ideas. Yeah, exactly. We keep talking about teachers as guides. Wonderful. Okay, so think about what counts as a successful learning. And specifically in an EFL context, what does it mean to learn a language? Maybe this is something that we haven't reflected on before, but it's an existential question for us, right? What does it mean to learn a language? Does it mean being able to fill in the blanks with conjugated verbs in the different tenses? Is that learning a language? Is that learning? Is memorizing a vocabulary list learning a language? What is learning a language? And how, as a sequitur, how is it best learned? How do I believe a language is best learned? Do I make my students memorize the simple past irregular verbs in alphabetical order? Is that good for them to do what then? To put it on a test, right? But then what is our goal of our students learning language? I think that most of you will say that your goal is for your students to actually use the language in the future to communicate, right? Our goal is for students to use English in real life contexts. And this is something that we can make happen. Unlike, for example, a class like calculus, I remember taking a calculus class and I thought to myself, I like languages. I don't think I'm going to use calculus in my life. And to this day, I have never used calculus, right? But English is different. English is something that students can use in different contexts. So if I want my students to do that, what is the best way for me to teach them according to science and according to experience for them to communicate, etc., right? So yes, we have to think about all of these things. We have so many great comments in the chat. Learning the language is using it contextually. Absolutely, Munther, thank you. Yes, language is not in a vacuum. Language is in communication. Vilma says we are guides, responsibility to guide learners in our classroom and support students to use the language. Good. Okay. Yeah, Matilde says to learn a language is to build cultural bridges, for sure, for sure. And that's very important nowadays in today's globalized society, right? Stephanie says speaking in class is the best way to practice English. Sure, it's a good way to practice English as long as they have had a lot of also input in the language. So all of these things that you guys are mentioning can all be put into a teaching philosophy to build your teaching philosophy. Super important. So these questions are just a starting point for you to reflect, what do I really believe about teaching? Yeah? Okay. So here are some key components that you want to be sure to cover when developing your teaching philosophy, which are the following: your view of language and learning. And when we look at this, we can again ask ourselves questions to start stimulating our thought process. So, what is language? I know it seems like an obvious question, but is it really? What is language? What is the purpose of language? What is learning? Who are the actors in learning, etc. Right? Your role as a teacher. Obviously, you're not, we've talked about being a facilitator, right? But what does that look like? It doesn't mean just sitting and drinking your coffee and watching students speak English, right? It means other things too. So what does being a facilitator mean in the classroom? Your students and your context. Those of you who are teaching in public school systems in Latin America, we have very similar contexts between Peru, Bolivia, from Chile, from Ecuador. We have similar contexts, right? So what about my context influences what I believe about teaching? Yeah. Teaching strategies you prioritize. Do you prioritize, for example, gamification? Do you think it's very important to use games? Do you think music is very important in the classroom, etc.? Also, we should consider assessment and feedback beliefs. What do you believe about, for example, error correction in English? Are you the type of teacher who wants to interrupt the students to correct them that moment that they're speaking? Or are you the type of teacher who wants them to express their ideas and then later go back and go over some of the mistakes you heard as a class? Do you think it's necessary to correct all errors in the language? Why? Why not? How do you do that? Right? So all of these things kind of inspire questions to ask ourselves that then we can put into our teaching philosophy. Okay? Thank you for all of your comments. Yes, this is very, very interesting, very important ideas all of you are mentioning. The idea of being spontaneous, the idea of considering context, the idea of motivating students. All of these points are really key in developing your philosophy. Okay, so when we answer these questions about what we believe about teaching, about learning, about language, students, its assessment, etc., we need to not only state those beliefs, but we need to convert them into actions that we can put into practice in the classroom and even speak about the outcomes that we get. So where on the slides here, it says from beliefs to practice. A philosophy starts with your beliefs, yeah? But the important part is to change those beliefs into a reality in the classroom. So we develop them into actions that we do in the classroom that reflect those beliefs. And then if we already have outcomes from those actions, we can discuss some of those outcomes. In other words, how has this worked in the past for you? So, for example, if I have a belief that is language is learned through meaningful use. Yeah, language is learned through meaningful use, which is what most of you are sharing in the chat today. Great, that's wonderful. So what does that mean in my classroom? That means that I use a lot of pair work, for example, or task-based activities, or in as far as corrective feedback, I prefer general feedback over explicit error correction because I believe that that when I correct students, they get intimidated or something like that. And also, according to research, by the way, when we overtly correct students in the classroom, it doesn't stick in their brains long term. So I can mention that from research has shown that overt error correction does not stick long term, and therefore I deal with errors in this way. Yeah. See, so this is how we convert those principles into practice. Okay. Yes. All right. It's important that our teaching philosophy actually sound like us. And I know it seems a little bit redundant to say this, but it's true. So in a teaching philosophy, when we develop it, we tend to prefer authentic over academic. In other words, this is not a journal article that you will send for publication in a peer-reviewed journal that's scientific. No. This is a different kind of language. That doesn't mean that we use slang words and internet language to write our teaching philosophy. No, but we want it to sound authentic. So we need to find a happy medium between colloquial language and academic language, somewhere in the middle for our teaching philosophy. We use clear human language. Yeah. It's okay to use first person in our teaching philosophy. So we can say I, because I know, at least in the United States, I can speak for my teachers that always said, don't use I in your writing. In a teaching philosophy, it is okay to use I. Real classroom examples matter. Concrete evidence or concrete activities that you have actually done in your classroom are crucial in a teaching philosophy to show that you know how to take theory and put it into practice. And your philosophy should sound like something you would actually say. Not that someone else would write, not that a computer would write or AI, but something that you would actually say. Okay? Okay, I want to take a moment. I see a question in the chat, and I'm going to take a very brief moment to address it because I think it's a very important question, though not directly related with teaching philosophy per se, but it could be part of my teaching philosophy. Teresa asks in the chat, what is your opinion about the use of L1 in the classroom? I think this is a very, very important question that Teresa asks us. Thank you for asking it, because it's very, in today's debate about language acquisition and language teaching, it's a very hot topic. The use of the L1 in the classroom. Before, in the beginning of the 2000s, it was the idea that we should never use the L1 in the classroom ever, only the target language for acquisition, never ever the first language. That was the belief about 25 years ago. Okay. In the last few years, it has become more popular to incorporate the first language in the classroom, but in a strategic way. Some people refer to this as translanguaging, right? Using a little bit of the first language in the EFL classroom. But we don't use it to translate necessarily segments of discourse that we say. We don't use it for that purpose. We use it more to build bridges between the first language and the second language, to build what we call the interlanguage. Yeah, this is like a bridge between my native language and the language that I'm learning. So I personally believe, according to research, that a little bit of use of the L1 in a strategic way in the classroom is okay, because it actually does show, research shows that it does help to build the interlanguage. So I think it's acceptable, but in strategic moments. If we have time in the future, it might be interesting to develop a webinar about this, but that's what I can say briefly about use of the L1 in the EFL classroom. Okay, yes, so let's continue. Okay, let's remember also that your philosophy is a tool and it's not a test. In other words, there is no perfect philosophy. There's no one person who has written the perfect philosophy. They all vary. We're all different. We're all different people, and our teaching philosophy reflects us. Because in a lot of times, I'm sure you teachers have heard as well, there's this saying that we teach who we are, right? And all of us are different, and that's beautiful. So our teaching philosophies are all going to be slightly different. So there's no perfect philosophy. And a teaching philosophy grows with experience. Like some of you have been mentioning throughout this webinar, that's great. Maybe when you first started, you believed something, yeah? And now after 10 years, 20 years of experience, your beliefs have changed. Your teaching philosophy also changes, right? And that's okay. That's totally good. Being open to learning new things and being open to change is very important in our profession. And so that's great. Your teaching philosophy can change with you as a teacher. And clarity brings confidence. Why do I say this? Because the clearer your teaching philosophy is, the more confident you will feel in the classroom, because you have developed now a document that clearly states what you believe and how you put those beliefs into practice. So your teaching philosophy not only will help you professionally for all of the reasons we mentioned before, but also personally in the classroom. You will feel more confident in the classroom having a teaching philosophy that supports your own practices. Okay, let's look briefly at this excerpt from a teaching philosophy. And I want you to continue to comment in the chat. You guys have been doing an outstanding job. Wonderful conversation. continue to comment in the chat about this in particular now. So you can see I put an excerpt, a small piece from a teaching philosophy here on the screen. And I want you guys to tell me what you think about this. So it says, I believe teaching English is about covering the syllabus and making sure students learn grammar and vocabulary. I follow the textbook and assess students through tests to check their progress. Okay, teachers, what do you think? Knowing what you know about teaching philosophies, what do you think about this example? Is it a good example? It's not a good example? And why? What do you think? Is it a good example? Not a good example? And why do you think that? Let's see what you guys comment on this. I'm interested to see, because this is putting all of these ideas into an actual philosophy. So yeah. Okay, so Monica says this is not a teaching philosophy. Okay. Eliberto says this is true, but partially there are other aspects we have to take into consideration. Obviously, this is just a short fragment, right? The philosophy would be longer, but we don't have time to go through all of that. Piero says it looks like a school system in my country too mechanical and content dependent. Okay, so you disagree with the theory behind this one, right? It's not a good example. It's more like an objective. Okay. Isabel says it's a bit narrow, only focuses on summative assessments. Hal also says it's a bad example. Claudia says definitely not a good example. Okay. Melissa says this is outdated. It's from the old times. Yeah. Okay. There are a lot of things wrong with this example. It is not a good example for a lot of the reasons that you just mentioned, and also because actually it's too general. I follow the textbook, okay, right? And I assess students through tests. Okay, tests. But what do your tests look like? Are they multiple choice tests? Do you make them speak? Right? So it's too general as well. It is not. And obviously it's not based on the more recent findings, scientific findings about language teaching. Okay, let's take a look at a revised version that is better. Obviously, this is not the whole philosophy. It's just a fragment, right? So here's a better version. I believe teaching English is about helping learners use language confidently in real contexts. I design lessons that connect grammar and vocabulary to meaningful communication, encourage interaction, and adapt to students' needs. Assessment is ongoing and is used to support growth, not just measure it. Okay, so one of you had commented that they only mentioned summative assessment. And now in this version, they're also mentioning formative assessment, right? Because it's an ongoing process. Okay, so this is a better version of the previous one. If we had more time, I would have you guys rewrite the previous philosophy. But this is just one way that we can improve it. And I'm sure you guys can also think of other ways to improve that previous philosophy, right? Okay, and again, Santi, for example, says, I don't agree completely. That's totally fine. All of us are allowed to develop our own teaching philosophies, and that's respectable. But we also have to think about how we defend our teaching philosophy, right? If my teaching philosophy is this, what is that based on? Is it based on science? Is it based on research in the field? Or is it based on because my neighbor said that this is what I should do? Yeah. So we need to think also about the sources that we use that create our beliefs in the classroom. Okay. We have to make a brief mention about the use of AI, because as we've seen in the past, and as we've done webinars on AI use, right? AI is part of our daily lives. It's not going anywhere. It's going to stay. So we should mention AI use in generating a teaching philosophy. Just as in many of the things we do as teachers, some AI use is okay. Like what? Well, we can use it to exchange ideas, because remember, if you're using ChatGPT or any other chatbot, which is like Poe or Copilot or Claude or any of these that you type something in and they respond like a text, right? Remember that these are conversations. So I can give ChatGPT an idea and ask it to refine it, or ask it what it thinks or something like that. But remember, it's a chatbot and not a human. We can also use AI to help put theory into practice, maybe to give us some ideas of how this is my belief. How could I put that into practice in the classroom? We can use it to revise a thought that we have. Maybe I wrote a thought, but it's like it's not coming out exactly the right way that I want it. I can ask ChatGPT to revise it for me. But a chatbot cannot represent your true beliefs on language and teaching. A chatbot doesn't know what you think. You can tell it, but it's still not the same. And remember that we need to create a philosophy that has that human component in it. And this is something that AI cannot do. So again, we can use it to help us in the process a little bit, but we're not going to tell ChatGPT, create my EFL teaching philosophy, because it's not going to do a good job. Let's put it that way. Okay. Yes, we see some more comments here also from Santi. It says, my philosophy is students learn by doing and by using the language. Great. And that's perfect. So you believe that because maybe you learned about theory or something. And how does that appear in your classroom? So what do you do in your classroom that reflects that belief? Yeah. We have Manther also, who says philosophy is to be clear about your role and your student's role. Also, you have to talk about the way of teaching and how it differs from traditional teaching. What changes you create. Okay, so for example, yeah, that's also an important component. Okay, so all of these ideas are great, and all of them we can pull together and we can put them into our teaching philosophy. Okay, to finish today's webinar, I want to end with this quote that I have here on the screen, which is from Aristotle. And he said, educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. And I like this quote a lot personally, and I think it's something that I incorporate in my teaching philosophy too. We can also take quotes from famous educators, from famous people who have spoken about education, who are advocates for education, if they are relevant to our practices. In my classroom, for example, at the university, I believe in seeing my students as human beings, in caring for them, because I personally believe that when I care for them, those affective filters that we've talked about before are reduced, and the learning or acquisition process, depending, is more effective. So I can incorporate this quote, for example, into my teaching philosophy and take a quote that was said so long ago, but use it, that make it relevant in modern day times. Yeah. So you guys can also find an inspirational quote that you believe kind of summarizes or reflects your ideas about teaching and teaching practices, and you can also incorporate it into your teaching philosophy. So I'm leaving that for you for food for thought for you guys to reflect. Do not forget to join us on the Zoom session. The Zoom session will start in approximately 20 minutes. The Zoom link is posted on the Facebook page, so you guys can go right there to the Facebook page, click on the Zoom link, and continue to have the conversation with us. But that is all for today's webinar. I hope you have found this topic useful. I hope you have enjoyed this session this month. I wish you all a very happy, healthy 2026. I hope that you have great experiences in your classrooms with your students. I hope you learn a lot in the process, and I will see you guys again next month. Take care, teachers. Bye.